hopefully more people will watch and the recording than show up in person. But it will remain to be seen. Any questions come up for you, any of you this week that you want to address before I get into my stuff?
You're going to be talking about the suing?
Yeah, I'll start off with that lawsuit, the new lawsuit filed in Marin County, which names the National Association of Realtors, the Marin Association of Realtors, the North Bay Association of Realtors, the Bayris, and then several companies. It's pretty much what we would call a copycat lawsuit to the other ones that have been filed around the country. Probably some enterprising attorney decided there was money to be had here and found someone who sold their home and build some kind of claim around it, similar to the other claims, which have been that the compensation wasn't to the brokers, was not fully disclosed, and therefore they were damaged. So, I mean, I'm on the board of Bayris, and we cannot talk about pending lawsuits, but we haven't even, though this has been publicized in the press, we haven't actually been served a complaint as of yet. So we don't even know what the complaint says. And the background that I just gave was reading one of the press reports. So I think that's kind of a ploy of this kind of lawsuit, is to get it publicized and get it out in the public, and see if they can rally more, maybe build it into a class action suit as opposed to an individual, and so forth and so on. So we've seen these copycat lawsuits all over the country over the past 2 or 3 months, and probably will continue to see them. Most of the real estate folks believe that they don't have, they're without merit, as one would say. But as in any lawsuit, they have to be defended, and the lawyers have to be paid.
The whole purpose.
The whole purpose. Lawyers have to be paid.
I have a question regarding that, because it seems, how are people really going to show where they've been financially damaged? Because that's really kind of the essence of it, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know how the case in Missouri, I don't know how they presented that, because that's the only one that's gone to trial so far, and a jury of 12 of the plaintiff's peers decided that the plaintiffs were guilty. Now, I think there's a popular term when you get into kind of lawsuits sometimes around commissions, and the term of art is called a disgorgement. They disgorge the commission. So in a class action suit where you've got thousands of members and it covers multiple years of sales, they just disgorge all the commissions that were paid because they were done in bad faith, or without disclosure. So that would probably be the conclusion here, that they would disgorge the full amount of the commission, even though the seller may have made lots of money on the sale or whatever. That's kind of immaterial to the case.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's not good, but it does lead on to what we need to do about this. And at our party yesterday, I ran into Liz Uribe, and she said she was meeting a seller, and the seller is kind of asking, why do I have to pay the buyer broker's commission. And she was wondering what to say. And I said, well, first thing is, she says, you don't have to pay that. It's that's only payable if you agree to pay it. But this morning I went back and looked at the disclosure that you should be able to see here on the screen, I hope, since the seller's advisory regarding real estate broker compensation in the sale of real property. And I've asked Haley this morning to prepare this with our logo and blank here, where you can insert your name of buyer's agent where there's insertion. So we'll get this back and I will circulate it, and we'll want to see this advisory on all our transactions. Where we're representing the seller, and then there's the separate buyer one relating to the buyer. So just looking at this, and it says, while you may choose not to offer compensation to buyer's agents through the MLS, and you have no legal obligation to do so, it is important to be aware of the impact of that decision. And then it lists these things, bullets. Many buyers are struggling to raise sufficient funds for the purchase and closing costs. Some buyers will have no written agreement with the buyer's agent to pay an agent to represent them. Since buyer's agents do not want to work for nothing, that buyer's agent may, prior to making an offer, make a written request of the seller to pay them a commission. The seller may decline that request. Another alternative is for the buyer to sign a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement with their agent, whereby the buyer agrees to compensate the agent for the representation of the buyer in their purchase. The BRBC provides that the amount the buyer will owe to their agent will be offset by any amount the buyer's agent receives from the seller's broker through the MLS. If there is no offer for compensation to the buyer's agent through the MLS, the buyer may be uncomfortable writing an offer to purchase that property for fear that they will owe their agent a large sum of money if they purchase the property. The buyer may request that their buyer's agent only show them properties where there is an offer of compensation through the agent through the MLS, which is legal. The final alternative is for a buyer. Now, we can't steer that ourselves, but we can ask our buyer, do you want to see properties where the seller is not offering any compensation to the buyer's agent, because under our agreement, our BRBC, you would have to pay that? And they may say, no, I don't want to see those properties. So that's that statement. The final alternative is for the buyer to request in the purchase agreement that the seller compensate the buyer's agent the amount that the buyer owes the agent after deducting any amount the buyer's agent receives through the MLS offer of compensation from the seller's agent. The seller may choose to pay all, some, or none of the amount requested by the buyer. If none of these approaches results in compensation to the buyer's agent, the buyer may decide that they will not want to buy the property because they would owe the buyer's agent the agreed upon compensation, or in some cases may not have sufficient funds to do so. So it's a marketing decision, really. It comes down to that. And it's always been a marketing decision in that respect. And it, as we talked about it, I talked about it with Liz last night. The lenders have always recognized the commission as part of the value of the property, and when they appraise the property at $1 million, and it includes a 6% commission, they're including that as part of the value, and they'll give it. And then the lender is recognizing that they aren't only lending on the value of the property, but that value includes a commission. So the lender is actually, say somebody's getting a 90% loan, the lender is lending 90% of that commission back to the buyer to pay the commissions. And what I said to Liz was, the commission may be coming out of the seller's proceeds, but you've priced the property at a value that includes the commission. So let's say, we were smart enough to determine what 90, the value is without a commission, then we add a commission to it, and that's the price we offer it for. So the seller is really netting what, they're supposed to net. If that's what if they have a net figure, we work with the net figure. And the seller, though it's coming off the seller's closing statement, and they get deducted on their taxes, which is an advantage. Often, they aren't paying the commission because the buyer's giving them the money to pay the commission. There's no sale without the buyer's money. So it's the buyer's money and the lender's money that is giving the seller the money to pay the commission. So it's all a big circle. And the reason we've always done it that way is it helps smooth the transaction. So I used to have an employer who he made the reference one time that money is just a lubricant. In this case, the commissions being that way they are is a lubricant to help the transaction go smoothly. So that's what I would say. So any questions on that? We will probably be adding that seller advisory disclosure or advisory regarding compensation, and the buyer advisory regarding compensation as required forms in our transactions. So look forward to that. Question from Curtis: do you think the final act for have sellers and buyers to pay their agent individually? This has been an ongoing threat since I have been in real estate due to similar lawsuits which never gained traction. It seems to have finally done so. No, I don't think so. I think the parties that be are smart enough to figure out the marketing aspect of all this and why it's been done that way historically. There's nothing illegal about it. And as commissions have always been negotiable. We've never kind of, set an industry rate that's required. There's no kind of not class action, what do we call it? Conspiracy here to have a fixed commission. And the parties that pay it, that's always been a choice. It probably hasn't been as clear a choice in the documentation as it will be in the future. So Bill and Shannon in their legal update a couple of weeks ago indicated that CAR's forms are likely to change early next year to probably be more specific about it being an option for the seller to pay this commission. And the seller would initial right there, like they do in the arbitration clause or the liquidated damage clause, they would initial right there in the RLA where it already says that they've agreed to pay the buyer's agent. They would initial that separately to make, further confirm that they've agreed to pay that commission. And we're expecting that CAR will likely sponsor legislation next year that says that all buyer's agents shall have a written agreement with the buyer, a BRBC essentially. So we need to get used to that form. We CAR strongly advise it uses it with your buyer. Our legal counsel strongly advises we use it with our buyers. And I strongly advise you use it with the buyers. So next buyer you have, try it out and see what happens and report back to us and say, yeah, the buyer agreed to it. Or no, the buyer said they didn't want to work with that. That's the worst scenario, that they say, no, I don't want to work with that form. And then you'd have to explain why, but anyway, it's likely it will be a matter of law that we will use that sometime next year. truly stated with 6% commission, we just mentioned many in the business use that comment. You know, I think we all try to make a living at this business. I mean, we have varied commissions on different types of property. Raw land, you know, often used to carry a higher percentage. I know we used to list raw land at 10%. We used to list mobile homes at a higher percentage. It just floats around, and we all can see what the commissions are paid through the MLS, so we kind of adjust to the market. As prices have gone up, our commissions have gone down. Our commission rates have gone down because the prices are higher. So that's just kind of a natural evolution. But, you know, over the years, I think it's been fair to the buyers and the sellers that the amount we charge, and to the extent, you know, I've never heard anyone say, well, that's, I mean, if they think it's an unfair charge, they won't hire us, period. Okay. Any questions, further questions on that? Let's move on to something that came up this week also. We've got the verification of property form. So this came up, and we had a buyer who went to inspect the property. It had been altered from when it was, they bought it, they put down the things here, and then they didn't want to close. Well, you know, we all know that the purpose of this, the final verification of property condition, is not a contingency. Let's see, unless otherwise agreed, buyer and seller understand and agree that a final inspection is not a contingency of this agreement. The verification of the property or its waiver is not intended in any way to alter the contractual obligations of the seller regarding the condition of the property to be delivered to the buyer at possession date, and is not based upon any statement or representation by the brokers, associate licensees, or brokerage employees. And then there's this paragraph C is another cover our ass kind of clause that they will be held harmless from any of these things. And then the buyer acknowledges that A, the property is substantially as it was, or the seller has completed any replacements, modifications, and so forth, except for, and then there's exceptions, and or if checked, the buyer waives the right to this final verification. So long and short is the final verification is not a contingency. That buyer needs to go through with that closing, and then if they believe they have a claim against the seller, they would make that claim afterwards. Something else that came up this week was we sometimes take our sellers at face value, that they have the capacity to sign the forms we're asking them to sign in order to convey the property, basically. So here we have the RLA. Is that what you can see there? Somebody say yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good, thank you. So the RLA, when we finish it, when we complete it, there are seller representations somewhere along in here. Seller represents that unless otherwise specified where the seller is unaware of any notice of default against the property, any delinquent amounts due under a loan, blah, 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 any bankruptcy pending, blah, 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 any current pending or proposed special assessments shall have probably been notified the broker in writing if seller becomes aware of any of these items. And then further, it talks about the legally authorized signer. Wherever the signatures or initials of the legally authorized signer identified in the signature block below appear on the agreement or any relevant, it shall be deemed to be a representative capacity for the entity, so this is talking about when you have a trust or LLC or something. But 24, ownership, title, and authority. Seller warrants that seller is the owner of the property. 2, no other persons or entities have title to the property. And 3, that the seller has authority to both execute this agreement and sell the property. Exceptions to ownership and title and authority are as follows. So what happens, I think quite often is, the seller says, yeah, I own the property, and we just sign up the listing. And we don't verify that in any way. So what happened in the past week was, a couple of weeks, was the property was in a trust. So, it was representative capacity, and that the person signing our listing said they had the capacity to sign it. Well, as it turns out, the trust has 2 minors as trustees of the property, besides the person who was representing, they could sell it. So these minors are on title and would need to sign to sell it. However, a minor can't sell a piece of property, right? So what can be done? Well, we're exploring that the minors, the court would have to appoint guardians for those minors, and then the guardian could sign for the minors. Well, this, as you imagine, is going to take some time. Buyer's not happy. Buyer wants out of the deal, wants the money paid for their inspections that they did, and because we didn't have a clear picture of who the seller really was. So, moral of the story is, when you're listing the property, order up a prelim right away. Get your favorite title company to order you up a prelim, and you can look at verify the title at that point. If there's a trust, get a copy of the trust and turn it over to the title company and have them look at it. Minors can only dig the property. I don't know what that means. Curtis is on a roll this morning. Okay. But anyway, it's a good practice to just as part of your listing process, to pull up a prelim, and verify the title before you get into a contract with the buyer, where maybe the seller representative can't perform. Any questions on that? Okay. A couple things came up around this week around disclosures. So one of our agents used to be with another broker and represented the sale of the property for that other broker about 3 or 4 years ago, and now is relisting the property. She happens to be in possession of a file that includes the old documents from the prior sale 3 or 4 years ago with the prior broker. Now, it was made clear to us in the legal update that a agent who's changed brokerage doesn't have an obligation to ask the prior broker for the file. That's not kind of a requirement, because that prior broker is not involved in the new listing. So, we would not have any obligation to disclose something we don't have. But in this case, she has the file. And the question was, well, since it was the other broker's file, does she still deliver it? And yeah, and the question, the answer is, you got it, you give it. Yes, we will turn over those disclosures. And it's another reason for you to not necessarily keep a paper file, because then you're gonna, someone's going to subpoena you down the road, and when you didn't produce that paper file that you had, someone's not going to be happy with that, and it's not going to look very good. So,
Garrett, with that kind of a situation, because a file that you end up with at the end of a transaction can have an awful lot of stuff. So is it that you would give everything, or just all the basic disclosure information?
What our TCs are trained to get from our agents is what we need for the to meet DRE requirements of supervising the file and having all the appropriate paperwork.
Okay. The
thing that is often most cumbersome in getting that stuff over is correspondence.
Yeah.
So, you got to send all your emails, and stuff, because we are supposed to keep the correspondence. Even text, if we can download them and so forth. So, once all the paperwork, there may be more paperwork in there than we require. And so that's just superfluous, you would, once the file is closed, and I would say, give it 6 months or so, and then, purge your files. So you don't end up with files that are going to be subpoenaed down the road. Sharon, you had a question?
It was the same question. Yvonne, you're still on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we answered. Okay. The other thing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't it mandatory at this point that we let go of our files or upload them to? It's
strongly recommended by our legal counsel. So it's strongly recommended by your broker, that, once the file is closed and we have everything we need in our the broker file, that you kind of get rid of your agent file.
Okay.
I know we're reluctant to do that because it's such a big piece of art, that we have and created, this huge big file, and we don't really like our files, but legal advice is don't hang on to them. With the other question that came up around disclosures this week was an appraisal. Eric says yes, thumbs up. Yeah, so we are in possession of an appraisal that was done by a prior buyer who canceled the transaction. And the question is, do we disclose this appraisal? And let's see. It is, our legal counsel says, it is a legal requirement to disclose it, but you can redact the price. So you don't have to, by redacting the price, we've all heard about redacted documents, right? It's when you take the black pen and cross out, all the important stuff that isn't legally permissible or so in this case, you would take that appraisal, and anywhere it kind of mentions the value of that particular property, you would just black that out, and I wouldn't suggest you do it. I would suggest that your client do it if that's what they want to do. If they didn't want to show what the price was, then have them strike through a copy with a black pen, redact it, and disclose the appraisal after they've done that.
Garrett,
Yeah.
It's probably been 3 years or more, and I was with a different company, but at that point, the way I was advised was that appraisals were not required disclosures because they were opinions. So it sounds like it's not quite that way. And maybe the opinion part is all about the value that's put in the appraisal. So,
yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at an appraisal, they usually got 3 or 4 comps, right? You know, and there's
yeah,
a comp page, and that's all, you know, verifiable information. That's all public information. They got the sales from the MLS or wherever they got the sales. So,
yeah,
I mean, that stuff is out there in the field. Yeah, the opinion is the final value, and if we redact the final value, we're basically redacting the opinion. But the rest of the description, like the appraisal will have a square footage number, the
right.
appraisal will have a number of bedrooms and baths, which may differ from what the county says.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
that's why it's an important disclosure, because it'll be information to the buyer that will help them do a more complete evaluation of the property.
Okay, that makes good sense.
Okay, good.
Great.
It's good to make good sense.
Yeah. Once in a while anyway.
Okay. Let's see. I have one more form to cover this morning, and it's the DDA form. Let's see, where am I going here? I want to get rid of this form. All right, the DDA form. We talked a little bit last week about the designated electronic delivery address amendment. The brokers section of the RPA is where we put in, you know, the broker's name, the broker's, you know, agent's name, the addresses, you know, the license numbers, phone numbers, and email address. And then there's a checkbox in there on that form. I'll go to it in a minute, where if you check it, you have choice to check what the designated electronic delivery address is. And typically you would check it's the email stated above in the, you know, in the identification of the broker and agent. However, if you forget to do that, you really aren't able to, you don't have a DDA, and therefore you can't do a delivery of a document through email and have it really be a valid document. You have to have a DDA, as they say. So if you fail to do the DDA, or let's say your email changed, or in the midst of the transaction, one of the agents went to another company or something, so their email changed, you would do this amendment to the DDA and put in new information. So you would put in the email, the text number, or alternative, whatever you're going to choose. And so that's when you would use the DDA form. The actual place you check that box is in the RPA itself. Are we looking at the RPA here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So down here in this block, which is the real estate brokerage section, under 5, the agent's signatures and designated electronic delivery address. They're the agent's DDA. And so you would you fill out your information here. I have my email address. If there's more than one agent representing the firm, you would fill out additional forms. And then this is box here. It says your DDA, designated electronic delivery address, and you would check the email above. And then you've got a valid DDA. So you could transfer documents back and forth electronically, and they would all be considered delivered at the time you send them via that email, to that email. That's the delivery time. And it's important, delivery is the final thing that makes the transaction move ahead. So, people may sign it until it's delivered, it doesn't count. So make sure you've got your DDAs spelled out in that section of the contract properly, and everything will go smoothly. Okay, any questions on that? We didn't used to have DDAs. All right. Last week's
Is there a
practice
time
tip-
when
Yeah.
we would use the seller's email instead of yours? Or is it normally our emails?
I think as agent brokers, we're going to want the correspondence to come to us, not directly to the principal.
Okay.
Yeah, so we know what's going on. The practice tip. Oh, that's not the one I want. We talked about the seller advisory before. The practice tip last week had to do with oh, I'm still kind of getting that form. Sorry, let me stop that again. The questions from I'm looking for a form I'm not finding right now. Hold on a second. All right, there we are. So the practice tip I sent around on Wednesday, I think, or maybe last week, were these questions and answers from the fall risk management webinar. So these were questions that they got, and you can see there are quite a few of them, that they weren't able to answer during the webinar, so they answered them after. So regarding credits for repairs, is it sufficient to use the RR, which contains a release of liability? The release of liability language in the RR form states in paragraph 4B that the buyer releases seller from any loss, liability, expense claim, or cause of action regarding the disclosed condition of the property. It is our BRM, is our broker risk management's opinion that this simple release of liability is not sufficient to properly cover the seller and the real estate agent for a liability arising out of that issue. So they made a point of releases and getting formal releases when credits are being given, or other credits for repairs are being given, so that not only the seller but the agents are released of further liability in exchange for that credit. So they will help us write those kinds of releases. I'd say we get them in about 10% of our transactions. We have a further release of liability. It's our standard practice, a standard of practice to get a more complete release to benefit our seller and to benefit us as well. And then here's one about including the broker file, you know, the agent file kept. It says, if you sold a property previously and still have access to the entire file, including the broker file and or file of you as an agent kept, do you need to provide the disclosures and reports from that file to a new buyer? And the answer is yes. However, this is a reason for agents to refrain from keeping files. It is recommended that agents provide the files to the broker, and the broker should retain the file. GRE requires that if agents are retaining files, they ensure that the files are kept in such a manner as to ensure their confidentiality. This means that agents cannot keep the files in the garage or in the trunk of their car. The files must be kept on a computer and password protected or in a locked cabinet. Okay, so that's what the DRE is going to be looking for. So don't keep the file. So anyway, these are all good questions that came up and good answers. So be sure to look at that. I will send it out around again when I send out the recording to this training. So if you didn't take a look at it before, take a look at it when it comes around again. And the final thing I have has to do with the forms release. CAR is doing their forms update on the 19th. You've probably seen that if you've been on the ZipForms. It comes up as a big notice that as of the 19th, that's early next week, there will be 5 new forms and 58 revised forms. Bill Jansen, I think, spoke about them in the legal update that luckily they aren't a lot of changes we have to be too aware of. They're kind of boilerplate changes. But obviously when the update comes out, we'll be looking at all those forms and discussing the ones that we really do need to be aware of and digest and understand. So there's always something new, right? Okay, well, that's all I have for this morning. Unless there's any other questions. Nope. Okay.
But a few good points. So
Okay.
thank you much.
Well,
Thank
carry
you.
on. We won't have a training next week because it's the Friday before Christmas, I believe. So
Okay.
let's all enjoy our time and our holidays, and we'll probably skip the Friday before New Year's as well. So we may have lots of good stuff to cover in our first training of next year. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, everyone be well, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all later.
Thank you. All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.